I never thought I'd be making a video about the anatomy and physiology of chokeholds outside of mixed martial arts, but here we are, an NBA game, and Draymond Green attempted to put Rudy Gobert in a chokehold earlier tonight in the Warriors T-Wolves game. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and my goal in this channel is to help teach you about the medical side of the sports world. Now, there's some interesting anatomy and physiology that goes into kind of the science behind various chokeholds that typically we're only talking about in the world of mixed martial arts, but we, of course, saw this happen tonight in the NBA, so let's address this for some of you basketball fans to try and learn a little bit from what happened. Now, first off, for all the Warriors fans here saying Draymond was just coming in to defend Klay, I don't want to hear any of that because Gobert comes in here to try and pull the two of them together, and Gobert's taller. He just puts his arms out. One of them is up under Klay's arms, and because Klay is shorter than him, as he wraps his arms out, everything's moving around. He actually first hits him more in the side of the upper head right there, not intentionally trying to go for his neck and try and drag him off. But then, of course, here comes Draymond jumping in from the left side of the screen, specifically going for Gobert's neck, trying to wrap his arm around Gobert's neck, going for this chokehold. So doesn't even seem to compare to what Gobert was trying to do to break this up. But nevertheless, let's talk about chokeholds. So there's really two different types of chokeholds that we'll see in the sports world. Again, not applicable to basketball, but here we are. Those are an air choke and a blood choke, and they're named after what you're essentially trying to shut off or impair within the body. Now, I will say one of the most concerning things, honestly, about this whole sequence was how Draymond initially went in just with his forearm on the front, striking the front part of Gobert's throat. When we look at our biodigital anatomy tool here, that can result in a lot of trauma to the larynx or to the trachea, even the hyoid bone. The hyoid bone is this small little floating bone that sits within the trachea that you can feel, and then the tracheal cartilage right here is that sort of Adam's apple that you can feel in the front of your throat. But as you can tell, there's no protection there. And so if you've ever been hit in the front of your throat, this can be extremely painful. In the sports world, we can actually see athletes get trauma. You can get fractures to this laryngeal cartilage that can be a really significant injury and put you out for a long time. So that first moment where Draymond just comes in and his forearm hits square in the front in that Adam's apple, in that larynx, in and of itself can result in some direct trauma, fracture to these laryngeal structures in the front of the neck. The next part of this then that's really terrifying and just awful to watch is how Draymond just basically tries to drag Gobert by his neck. So he's got his arms up under his neck here. We'll talk about these different chokehold positions, but he just proceeds to drag Gobert, a large human, by his neck. Something that in and of itself adds to the danger of what is being done here in this sequence. Remember that in the world of mixed martial arts, when people are applying grappling techniques, they're applying chokes, they're usually a gradual progression to get into that position. It's not this quick, sudden, aggressive movement of dragging somebody across the ring. You're generally together, you're grappling, you're working into these positions and gradually getting into a spot where you apply that choke. It's not this sudden, quick, violent force like we saw here when Draymond comes flying in to put his arm across the front. But when you get into this position, this is a little bit more typical for a choke, and usually more of what you're going to see with what we call like a blood choke. You can see here how Draymond's arms are trying to compress along the sides of Gobert's neck. Now, if we look at our anatomy tool here, we have to talk about the blood flow, and we're going to work on our anatomy from the outside in. The first muscle we see right here is the sternocleidomastoid. The SCM muscle runs from down here on the collarbone up to this mastoid process in the back of the ear. If we hide that sternocleidomastoid muscle, then the first thing we're going to see is the external jugular vein. Of course, veins delivering blood back from the body down to the heart. So in this case, the internal and external jugular are going to be delivering blood from the brain back down to the heart, whereas the artery, the carotid artery, is going to deliver blood from the heart up to the brain. This whole structure that sits right here that's being affected with a blood choke is the carotid triangle. And in there, you're going to have the internal carotid artery, you're going to have the common carotid artery, and then you're also going to have some nerves. Whenever somebody applies a choke, there's pressure put externally onto these arteries, and you do a couple of things. Number one, if you hold pressure long enough and hard enough, you're going to compromise the blood flow to the brain. Whenever the brain has impaired blood flow, eventually the response, sort of the down the line effect, is you lose consciousness. You lose consciousness and you pass out. Part of the reason why your body's trained and designed to do that is that theoretically, if you pass out, you go flat, and then when you're flat, you allow blood to better distribute throughout your body and get back to the brain. So some of it is just the brain losing consciousness, and then the body's response to go flat to try to help with some recirculation of blood to get oxygen to the brain. The second thing that you can affect if we hide our vein here is in this area, we have a couple of structures, the carotid body and the carotid sinus. The carotid body is a chemoreceptor. So basically it senses chemical changes, and it sits right here at the bifurcation where the common carotid goes into the external and the internal. And its job is to sense alterations in the oxygen level, the chemical levels of things within the blood to then influence blood flow, blood pressure. The carotid sinus is then more of a pressure receptor. So if the carotid sinus senses a lot of pressure, it interprets that as the blood pressure is high in the body, and it signals down the stream effects to allow the blood pressure to relax. Now, if you apply external compression to that carotid sinus, you're going to falsely make the brain think that the blood pressure is really high, which is going to cause it to decrease the heart rate to try and dilate the blood vessels to lower the blood pressure, which can then also impair the blood flow up to the brain, leading to this whole sequence where you can have syncope. Now, the air choke is different. Of course, now we're trying to target the structures with the air, the windpipe, and you're not necessarily going to compress the trachea. With a wind choke, it's more the uncomfortableness, just how much more painful and intolerable it is to have direct pressure applied to the front. But usually that's an arm going straight across the front, as opposed to the arms kind of on the side, like we'll see in mixed martial arts with more of a traditional blood choke. Thankfully here, we didn't seem to see Gobert lose any consciousness or really seem to be too bothered by this. It wasn't that tight of a choke, thankfully, on Draymond's part. And as we saw Gobert walking off the court, seemed to be okay. So hopefully we don't hear anything subsequently developing in terms of some soreness or discomfort or injury to those airway structures in the front of his neck. So that's it for the video. Again, never really expected that I'd be talking about chokes and kind of that anatomy and physiology in the basketball world. If any of you have watched my MMA videos, we talk about that a lot whenever we see one of those occur. But nonetheless, an interesting thing to touch on from an otherwise really unfortunate and pretty bad episode. I can't think of the most recent time. Of course, the Rudy Tomjanovich punch came into mind, which was a lot scarier, and we've had some other violent episodes on the court, but this definitely sits up there from my perspective of just how uncalled for and ridiculously unsafe this was. But nevertheless, let me know any questions or comments down below, and until next time, we'll see you later.